Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Our weekend of watches is off to a running start. Everything you see in today's show is in stock and for sale. Reach out to me, Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing, details, even extra photos, and descriptions of boxes, sets, and accessories. I am your one-stop shop because we are also looking to build inventory. Trade us a watch you're not wearing for one you will love, or sell us a watch. One watch, an entire collection, it doesn't matter. No upper limit on value paid. We pay cash, we pay fast, we make it seamless and easy for you. I am your one-stop shop to buy, trade, or sell. T Mosso at thewatchbox.com. I often tell people that green is my favorite color, and it is, and that I love the Rolex Submariner, which I do, but people mistakenly put two and two together and think that the Hulk, the Kermit, or the Sermit must be my favorite Rolex. Nope. In fact, my favorite sub and possibly my favorite Rolex of all time is the SMURF. Launched as the first of the modern Submariner family. There was a 6-digit in the 80s, but the first of the modern 6 digits back in 2008 was the watch you see here. It was the first on a lot of levels. The first with the so-called super case. The first sub with a ceramic bezel insert. The first sub made in series out of white gold, and very, very special as the first full blue dial, blue bezel, white metal series production sub. 40 millimeters in diameter. It looks larger because the super case is broader. It has sheer sides and squared off lugs. But if you can wear the previous 5-digit reference, you can wear this beauty. Now later on, the bluesy, or the two-tone, was removed from the blue lacquer dial family because folks thought that, well, first of all, the old sunburst was popular, but also that the pure gold watch should have the distinction of the only lacquer dial to match the gloss bezel. And so this watch became more special after the bluesy went back to a sunburst dial in 2013. These were scarcely purchased because of the extraordinarily high price in comparison to steel. Relatively few of these were made. It has a wonderful feel of weight and heft to it, super substantial. And of course, Rolex, with its own foundry, making its own alloys, makes its own white gold. So case, bracelet, clasp, all in-house. Now this white gold is gray gold, an 18-karat alloy that is white all the way through. It never needs to be rhodium plated, and if it gets scratched, it's the same color underneath. The bezel, let's hear it. One of the silkiest and most refined I have encountered. Oddly enough, its only real rival is the Cartier Calibre de Cartier and maybe Grand Seiko for the sheer quality of glide and detent. It's difficult to have something that's well indexed and also silky smooth, but this is both. And being 120 clicks, super easy to line up with the minute hand. You just have to be better at stopping short than I am. Line it up, easy to read, ceramic insert, very scratch resistant, gloss lacquer dial base, white gold hands and indices, and plenty of lume. Note, all 3 hands luminescent. Every dive watch should have that feature. Folks often ask me, should I buy a Submariner or the Rolex XYZ? And my answer is always the Submariner if you're on the fence for 2 reasons. One, that timing bezel is worth its weight in gold. You'll find you use it for everything, even if you never dive. Second, only the Rolex dive watches and a couple of precious metal watches on Oyster Flex have some version of the glide lock, and only the Rolex dive watches have the full length glide lock with 20 millimeters of incremental adjustment and 2 millimeter steps. This is invaluable for sizing the watch on the fly in a way that even EasyLink can't accomplish. So a very special watch. This is my favorite Submariner of all time, and no worse than co-equally my favorite Rolex of all time. It's up there with the Oyster Quartz. This is an absolute monster, and one that's been overlooked. I feel that when we talk about the most collectible Rolex watches, the 2000s and 2010s, this one is going to have its name called multiple times. That said, Rolex is a fairly well-known brand, and we often talk about the Submariner. We do not often talk about Piaget or the Polo. Now, the original Polo dated from the 1970s and was a fascinating combination of a sporty watch and a dress watch with an integrated bracelet defined by its striated gadroons. Well, in 2016, the Polo returned in a very different form with a sort of cushion-like case profile, a steel sports watch for the modern era. Now, the original version from 2016, especially on the bracelet, looked like it was trying a little bit too hard to follow the path of the Nautilus. The next year, the Polo ADLC debuted, and it was a much better realized take on a Piaget sports watch. So here it is right here. You can see 42 millimeters in steel, under 10 millimeters thick. It's only 9.4. This is a watch that is 888 pieces, limited, and 100 meters water resistant. You can see it has a twin barrel automatic movement with a 48 to 50 hour power reserve. And then on the dial side, you can see that we have a couple of things that are a little bit different than a Nautilus. Starting with the shape of the watch, you can see it's more of a cushion than a round case. It has a TV screen-like profile with a rounded inner bezel, crystal, and dial, and all three have the same form. You can see that the satination of the bezel is a longitudinal rather than vertical, and there's a contrast between the polished lip of the bezel and the satin top. You can also see that the watch has plenty of luminescence, and in this regard, it actually surpasses the Royal Oaks, Nautiluses, and Aquanauts of the world. It is a handsome piece, very affordable, and nicely decorated with a combination of satin, polish, black, and silver steel. I'll also say this, ADLC is very, very resilient, and while I had some skeptical reservations about the material and watchmaking when I first got into the watch industry, I found that for the most part, it doesn't scratch. PVD, it should be noted, is a process, not a material. And there's a lot of cheap PVD out there, physical vapor deposition, but that's a process for applying a material. It's agnostic on the material itself. ADLC, or amorphous diamond-like carbon, is a super hard scratch-resistant material that is applied by PVD, and I find that in watchmaking applications, it is wonderfully resilient to marring. This is a fascinating strap. First of all, it's a Piaget factory strap. It's a rubberized piece of calfskin leather, so a more water-resistant take on leather that's also supple against the wrist and also not going to be degraded by heat, sweat, moisture, or grit on the wrist. An easy watch to wear. It's just over 46 millimeters lug to lug, which makes it surprisingly accommodating for a 42 millimeter sports watch. Now, I have a pair of twins that, frankly, could not be more different in terms of their origins. One hails from Geneva, one hails from Schaffhausen. These two cities don't even speak the same language. Northeastern Switzerland, Schaffhausen, the home of H. Moser and C. They speak German. Patek Philippe, out of the city and canton of Geneva, they speak French. Two watches that celebrate the same era, but oddly enough, the Moser is not billed as a pilot's watch, even though for all intents and purposes it draws on that design language. Moser tells us that in that period it built field watches that may have been used by pilots, hence we call this the Moser Heritage Center Second Funky Blue. Over here we have the Patek Philippe Calatrava Pilot 5522A, a 42 millimeter stainless steel 600-piece limited edition built for the New York Grand Exhibition from 2017, and it was only available in the North American market, specifically in the United States, at Patek doors in the States. This is a time-only center rotor Patek automatic. You will not find too many three-hand, no-date, time-only Patek Philippe 3420 applications. You could see the New York legend ghosted onto the case back, and in 42 millimeters in stainless steel, it is an awesome daily wearer, a very wearable and versatile watch, because although it is technically a Calatrava, with its steel case, automatic winding, and brilliantly loomed dial, it is a very sporty Calatrava. Now, what sets these two watches apart is that both of them come from the same aesthetic roots, but they take very different approaches to dial construction. Getting a little bit closer with the Moser, you can see that here we have applique numerals that are solid blocks of ceramic-based luminova. So these are actually three-dimensional blocks of lume. They are nothing but lume. They're not indices. They're not platforms. They're not numerals of white gold or metal. They're blocks of lume on a funky blue fume fade dial. Now, on the Patek, all that's really similar is three hands, broadsword style, hours and minutes, Arabic numerals, and a blue dial base. Because if we look here, you could see that the watch includes white gold numerals that are applied as applique, pieces of gold with lume atop them. The dial base is not a gradient. It's actually a sandpaper-like texture with a granular profile. Turning it all over, you could see that on the reverse side, we have a lot of modern Patek Philippe innovations, including the Patek Philippe seal and the silicone Spiromax hairspring, but also something that's still fairly recent, which is the 6-position adjustment. And when you combine the Patek Philippe seal, Gyromax free-sprung balance, the Spiromax silicone hairspring, and 6-position adjustment, Patek attests that the watch will run no worse than -3 plus 2 seconds per day. With Moser, there is no accuracy attestation made, but what we do have is a movement that is designed for hard living. HMC 200 is a sports watch movement. It's thicker than the Patek 34 or 32 or 324, pardon me there. And so it has a full balance bridge too, as a free-sprung architecture with a full balance bridge makes for a tougher movement than one that simply has a free-sprung architecture by itself. And whereas the Patek has a power reserve of 45 hours, this has a power reserve of 72. You can also see that the case design is different, as it has the look of a converted pocket watch with wire-style lugs, a rotund case, and an onion-style crown, whereas the Patek has more the look of a Calatrava, a wristwatch purpose-built with integrated lugs, a standard crown, and an altogether more modern look born of a 1930s Calatrava profile. So we have a dial that might be drawn from the 20s and early 30s, but a case that remains with us to this day, blended Calatrava-style lugs. Both of them, incidentally, 42 millimeters in stainless steel. And while we speak of blue dial watches, why don't we talk about Grunefeld? Launched in late 2018 for the 2019 model year, this is the 1941 Principia. Now, Grunefeld, out of Oldenzaal in the Netherlands, Tim and Bart, they call themselves the Horological Brothers. They come from an Audemars Piguet Renoir Papy background, but since the 2000s making their own watches, and this was their first ever automatic watch, their order books are closed. They're booked up for a couple of years and they're not taking new requests. But this watch is available here pre-owned without any weight. It uses the 1941 case, which is available in precious metal, but perhaps more alluringly here in stainless steel. 39.5 millimeters with a lovely turquoise dial. You can see the hands at center alpha style or fired steel. And then we have lovely razor-faceted, diamond-polished individual applique indices, and you can see that they twinkle like cut gems. We have a conical knurled crown, and the case itself is fairly complex. Note the concave bezel profile, the steps at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock, the fluted lugs with concave interiors, a very impressive composition with a buffalo leather strap that is Dutch orange on the bottom to remind you that these watches are not just made in the Netherlands, but the brothers themselves are dyed-in-the-wool Orange Army Dutch. Turning it all over, this movement's fascinating because it's customized and finished by the Grunefelds, though its origins are actually with Andreas Streller. If you've seen the recently released Streller Sirna automatic watch, that uses a version of this automatic base. So it's an automatic with 56-hour power reserve, a 3 Hz beat rate, and some of the highlights mechanically include 6-position adjustment and the combination of a full balance bridge anchored on both sides with a free-sprung balance. Now, one choice that the brothers made, basically everything aesthetic was guided by their hand. You could see that the bridges are shaped like the bell gable roofs of Dutch houses, traditional Dutch houses. You could see that they decided to fit pivot jewels from the barrel all the way down to the terminal end adjacent to the escapement, using golden chaton as cups to hold the jewels, as it would have been done in the pocket watch era. You could see that the barrel has been elaborately solarized, that the primary train wheels have been skeletonized, that there are 3 different types of finish on each bridge. You can see the mirrored anglage on the edge, then you can see that the recesses of the center are media blasted, and then there's a satinated channel up along the edge of each bridge. You'll also appreciate that all screw heads are black polished with slotted centers and chamfered circumference. The rotor itself is 22 karat, not 21, not 18, and definitely not plated gold. So you can see that there's absolutely mile-wide beveling on the edge of this rotor. There's graining on the center, there's black polish on the lettering, and then there's satination and a channel along the edge. So here we have 4 different finishes on this rotor, and you can see how the bevels come to a point absolutely delectable. You can also see that the bridge for the balance has been interior skeletonized, which is very impressive. And all these bridges are made of stainless steel, which is a bare to cut and a bare to finish. Why do this instead of using German silver or brass? Because sometimes when something is hard, it's more special for it, and I cannot agree more. Throw the watch on my wrist once more. Again, stainless steel, 39.5 millimeters. But what really sets this watch apart dimensionally is that it's only 47 millimeters lug to lug, which means this is a rare 39.5 that could easily wear on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, making it an agreeable unisex option for him or for her. Let's go independent once more with two lovely rose gold independents that could not be more different. So let's start with the Legacy Machine 1. Back in 2011, Max Boasser and his friends, that's MB&F, decided to create a wristwatch that was immensely hypothetical. That is, what if MB&F had existed in the late 19th century and had also, at that time, been working in the wristwatch genre? Well, the Legacy Machine is what might have resulted. So 44 millimeters in rose gold, the watch has an incredibly vaulted sapphire that accounts for about half the thickness of the case. There are two dials, independently settable, and then the watch has a dial side power reserve indicator that's a little bit unconventional in terms of how it traverses its scale, going from the bottom to the top, quite literally an up-down power reserve indicator. It even has its own little finished bridge. Now, the wheel, the balance, is a recessed bolt modern free-sprung balance. It has a traditional handmade overcoil hairspring, and then in addition to being free-sprung, it's a dual-anchored balance bridge, albeit a very unconventional one that arcs out. There's an incredible extended balance staff, and you can see the escapement on its own separate bridge sits on the dial side, and this is beaten away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. Again, 45-hour manual wind power reserve. It's a 14 millimeter diameter wheel, making it one of the largest I've ever encountered on a wristwatch. MB&F is Max Boasser and friends, and his friends are many. On this watch, the friends, or at least the principal friends, Jean-Francois Moser, former IWC complications engineer who founded Chronode, a movement specialist, and Kari Voutilainen, a Finnish watchmaker trained at the Wo-Step, who needs no additional introduction. So Kari focused on things like the style of the finish and the architecture of the bridge. Jean-Francois worked on the nitty-gritty of engineering the movement. And so what we have here is the size and architecture of a traditional pocket watch. You can see that the larger wheels have been interior beveled on their inner circumference as well as their spokes, creating interior angles within the wheels. Very difficult to do in such a confined space. We also have them on the bridges, as you can see at center. And then you can also appreciate that we have golden chaton cups for the jewels. We have solarization on the crown wheel core as well as the ratchet wheel. Notice how those have been dished with interior beveling surrounding the black polished screws. And you'll see the same treatment in all of the jewel sink, or I should say the screw sinks, with the jewel sinks, at least the primary jewel sinks, having those golden chaton cups. The use of yellow gold for the chaton, rose gold for the wheels, and then this lovely rhodium coat on the bridges, giving it a wonderful contrast of texture, tone, and material. And in particular, I love the extensible click that you can only really see when you're winding the watch. See how it ducks out from under its cover? And then we have this extended swan's neck style steel click spring, a very special watch. And again, independently settable, a fairly practical watch, so long as you can wear a watch of this size. You have the two different time zones accessible. We have the G&F Chatelain leaf spring style, double deployant clasp with the MB&F double-sided battle axe logo on it. Throw this watch on the wrist and you can see it's got a little bit of an antiquarian look. The lugs themselves aren't conventionally joined to the case. You can see how there is a large gap between them. Little details like that set this watch apart. You can see there's also a lovely solar satin graining on the base that forms the primary dial below the two lacquer dials. Very special watch. It is a big watch though, make no mistake. It's large, it's got a lot of presence. I would say you probably need a wrist of at least my size, 16 centimeters circumference, to wear this well. I like to zoom out a little bit to show some of these things in proportion. You can see this is a big one proportionally. That said, you don't need a huge wrist to own a watch from an exalted independent. I'm rather agnostic on what Roger Dubuis has become. The brand certainly makes nice things. It's an integrated manufacturer, and it has its fans. but I'm more of a fan of the type of watches it made back when the company itself was properly called Sogem, as established in 1995 by Roger Dubuis and Carlos Diaz. In the early days, Dubuis had a lot more influence, so the watches reflected classical watchmaking grace. There were two primary model lines in the early days: the Homage, which was very traditional, round-cased, an homage to the type of watches that Dubuis made back during his early days of watchmaking and in the prime of his career, and then the Sympathie. And the Sympathie, which is what you see here, became sort of the signature early Roger Dubuis design. This lovely case design, flowing and fluid, almost as though a piece of molten metal were drawn out and then flash frozen. You can see this is the first generation Sympathie, as we have the contoured outer case, bezel, inner bezel, dial, and crystal. Later on, to make the watches cheaper and easier to manufacture, the crystal, the inner bezel, and the dial would all be circular. When you have everything matching with the same contours inside and out, you have a first-generation Sympathie. You also have here the bi-retrograde perpetual calendar module that Roger Dubuis and Jean-Marc Viderecht, later of Agenor, created for the first Harry Winston high horology watch in 1989. So this watch, although it uses a modular complication, properly designed by Dubuis himself. You can see the case is beautifully finished. This is a 37mm case. The lugs are welded in, and the case is hand-finished, made old school style. This is a 28-piece limited edition. Two things you'll note on the dial. Aside from the fact that it is a bi-retrograde perpetual calendar, we have the Geneva seal, because this is a Geneva seal movement. You can see well on the bridges and plates. Also, Bulletin d'Observatoire. What does that mean? It means it went to the Besançon Observatory in Besançon, France, a very traditional center of watchmaking savoir-faire. And as a fully assembled watch, it was trialed as a chronometer, and the chronometer card for this watch that came back from Besançon names Roger Dubuis himself as the reguleur who actually tuned the watch. The movement is a twin-barrel automatic based on the old Longines 990, which was created in the late 1970s at the very tail end of Longines' manufacture watchmaking, when it was making its own movements. Through the years, it's been used by everyone from Vianney Halter to Roger Dubuis to Breguet. And Breguet actually uses the reference numbers 8810 and 8815 for this movement. Here, the twin-barrel automatic with a 44-hour power reserve has been extensively hand-finished to Geneva seal levels. Look at the bevel on the rotor, the bridges, as well as the jewel sinks right there. Engine turning on the base plate, linear Côte de Genève on the rotor and the bridges. We have a black-polished swan's neck regulator with a likewise black-polished Geneva-style stud holder. So Geneva hallmark and chronometer certified. And this twin-barrel movement was ultra-thin and unidirectional winding, one of the reasons why it was chosen for a modular complication with the perpetual calendar on top. Full deployant clasp. What's special about this one is not just that it is probably the most iconic version of the first generation Sympathie. This is a full set watch. For some reason, when we see these, and we don't see them often, they come in naked, bereft of the box and the papers. I don't know why. My feeling is that they were often sold to tourists in major markets who would leave the shop and forget to take the accessories in the box with them before returning home. But this one has everything. If you were to ask, what was the watch worn by Dubuis himself? It was the Sympathie 37 by Retrograde Perpetual. His was a silver dial, this one's black, but that's the primary difference. That's really the only difference. If you were to ask, what is the most iconic Dubuis design? You'd say the Series 1 Sympathie. And if you would ask, what is the most iconic Series 1 Sympathie model? It would be the by Retrograde Perpetual. This is the Roger Dubuis to own. It's also got an impressive wrist presence for a watch that's 37 millimeters. You can see it fills my wrist up. Those lugs have a lot of personality, so the watch isn't huge, but it is full-sized. It doesn't look quaint like a lot of 1990s era watches look. And of course, this watch went through its chronometry certification in 2000. That is the year 2000, before being sold in 2001. So this is definitely a product of the late 1990s, a very, very special watch, and a great way to get into independent watchmaking with a brand that is still available to provide parts and service. That's not always the case with companies like Pierre Kunz or Martin Braun. This is a watch that is still very much serviceable at a Richemont company today, even though today's Dubuis watches look nothing like it. People always ask me, Tim, what's your favorite? And at least in brand terms, It's between de Bethune and Patek Philippe. And de Bethune makes far fewer watches. In fact, the number from 2002 to date is right around 3,000 watches as of today in June of 2023. The watch you see here came out in 2005 and was only made in 6 pieces, as you see it right here. This is the DBS, and it was the beginning of de Bethune's foray into dial-side escapements, balances, and going trains. Now you can see this was one of the earliest versions of their dial-side deltoid barrel bridge. You can see the 2 barrels. The barrels themselves have been blackened. Their ratchet wheels are solarized. You can see the Côte de Bethune on the bridge itself. And in fact, if you look carefully, you can see that the Côte de Bethune is actually on a bridge capped atop the primary bridge. And then we have an early version of the triple parachute shock protection. You can see the bridge has been entirely black polished, but we have the 1 steel shock protection spring on each side, plus Inca block on the balance staff. You can also see this was an earlier version of the de Bethune in-house balance. The balance here, a combination of platinum masses and a titanium, a cruciform balance. It's not actually a wheel because it's non-annular. It looks like 2 crosses. And so this is an early version of the ever-evolving de Bethune balance, and it's important because this is the balance that's original to the watch. Sometimes these get upgraded when the watch goes in for service. The owner might request it, so it's great to see one of the originals that has the correct period balance. The actual moon phase, which you adjust using this pusher on the side, has an adjustment interval of once every 122 years, and it is made of 1/2 blackened steel and 1/2 white palladium. And as you can see, the moon phase is spherical. It is a sphere and a patented system that's actually driven by a bevel gear that you can see just below my finger. So this is one patent. Triple parachute was another. The hybrid hairspring was another. The balance wheel was another. The twin self-adjusting barrels was another. So you can see how many patents protect what you see on this watch. This is not a styling exercise. This is a statement of both styling credibility. De Bethune was determined to be different and avant-garde. They didn't want to create another Patek Philippe tribute, but it's also a statement of engineering acumen and original innovations. And you can see on the reverse side of this platinum watch, the power reserve indicator for the 6-day manual wind power reserve. And the twin self-adjusting barrels are very special because you cannot accidentally overwind the watch. The watch is easy to wear, though on paper, 42.7 millimeters might not sound small. You can see how narrow the pivot centers from side to side are for the hinge lug and then for the conventional lug. Throw it on the wrist, and this 6-piece watch, again, only 6 of these made, super easy to wear on a tiny wrist. It's so short across the wrist that it's almost as long across the wrist as it is wide from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and super thin at about 10 millimeters thick. It slides underneath any kind of a cuff. A wonderful way of getting into early de Bethune. This was the early days of their manufacture calibers. This was the early days of their avant-garde styles. Right after the classicism of the DB1 style case, the DBS was the real first foray into the world of progressive design that would come to define the brand and carry it to fame. And this again is a very rare model from a time when de Bethune was making dozens, not hundreds of watches per year. So very scarce, very desirable, very distinctive. No one's ever going to second guess who made it. That is, if they know who de Bethune is. Kind of an enthusiast's handshake. But I mentioned I am also a great fan of Patek Philippe, and from 1872 to 1927, the world's largest Patek Philippe distributor was Gondolo e Laborio of Rio de Janeiro. And through that 55-year period, the Cronometro Gondolo was a top-of-the-market special created by Patek in Geneva for Gondolo e Laborio in Rio de Janeiro. And so in demand were these watches that periodically lotteries had to be established among qualified customers to determine who would even get the opportunity to buy them. What we have here is an extraordinary Cronometro Gondolo in a 56mm gold case recently back from service and restoration. What sets this watch apart is its condition. First, the enamel dial. Do you see hairlines, spider cracks, fractures, chips, or divots? Neither do I. Look at the quality of the hands. Back in the day, they would have been manually cut and manually finished. Let's take a look at the back. You can see the original engine turning on the case. Not perfect, there are marks of wear and use, but you'd rather see that than something polished to a bald shine. Open it up, take a look at the inside. You can see the dedication fabricated exclusively Gondolo e Laborio Jewelers, Rio de Janeiro. And you can see the movement number on this interior case back and the extraordinary Patek Philippe caliber 21 inside. You could see jeweled to center and beautifully frosted bridges. You could see gilded and frosted, probably done the old style using acid or maybe a wire brush. You'll also note some lovely period pieces, including wolf's tooth gearing between the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel. You see where they mesh? Wolf's tooth gearing was an early attempt at an advanced tooth profile that would promote minimal tangential rather than sliding contact. Look at that black polished click that doubles as the click spring, and listen to it. You'll see a similar black polished click spring on the modern day Laurent Ferrier watches, which really pay tribute to Laurent Ferrier's longtime employer Patek Philippe, which in its historical period of pocket watch manufacture often used click designs like this. Now you can see the bridges, interior angles at a time when people were largely considered to be indifferent to the finish of their movements. It wasn't something you often looked at or shared. It was something mostly seen by watchmakers, and yet you can see how broad and rounded those bevels are, and 1, 2, 3 interior angles. The third one on a steel black polished cap atop the escape wheel. Look at this snail cam regulating the micrometric adjustment system and this steel black polished Geneva stud holder. Look at that split compensated bimetallic balance that beats away at a stately 18,000 vibrations per hour. Look at the anchor. Before I wouldn't want to start this thing up, take a close look at the anchor and look at how it and the escape wheel have both been black polished and finished. Even tiny components like the bridge for the anchor have been beveled on their side and polished on their top. And of course, this is old school. This is the late period of chronometro gondolo, but still long before shock protection. And there's a fired blue overcoil hairspring there. It jumps to life, and it is simply resplendent. This is as elemental as watchmaking gets. Crown, crown wheel, click spring, ratchet wheel, barrel, center wheel, third wheel, fourth wheel, escape wheel, anchor, balance. This is as good as it gets. There you can see the number on the movement is the same as the number on the interior caseback. A very, very cool watch. 56 millimeters in diameter, enamel dialed, recently restored. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.